What's up, everybody? Welcome back to another episode of 10X Recruiting, brought to you by Metaview. We have my boy, Sile. Sile, you're looking good. The hair's flowing, baby. How you doing?
I'm good, man. I got a new barber, actually. So I'm glad you mentioned it.
Yeah, you look like a model. You look like a...
I don't know about that. This is only for the people who listen without the video are going to believe you.
I think it's called having a voice for radio. So anyway, on today's episode, we had Viet Nguyen on, who leads recruiting operations at Vercel. Viet and I go way back. This guy is an absolute legend. I tried to hire him at DoorDash. He tells a story in the pod that I rejected him. And I was like, I don't think that's actually true. But anyways, what were your takeaways from the episode with Viet?
I was pumped by this episode because I feel like I speak a lot about the importance of unstructured data in the world of AI. And I feel like finally there was someone who was sort of like, although he didn't use the phrase, he was basically talking about how he throws a ton of unstructured data at ChatGPT to help him run a more effective recruiting operation, which is just sick. So you obviously hear the specific example he talks about, but I think it's such a clarifier for a lot of folks, I'm sure, of what we mean when we say, hey, chuck the unstructured data at the LLM, work with it to make sense of it, but don't obsess so much about refining that context. Just get it in the mix. So yeah, you'll see in the example in a second. But
I had a couple. The first one is progress, not perfection. So everybody we talk to, Sile, this is where you and I will hate slack each other about getting guests on the pod. Is like everybody in recruiting wants to have this perfect product that's fully finished and ready to go. And the first example Viet uses a couple in the pod, is it took him 3 hours. It spits out this deck, and it's basically just kind of analyzing this guy, Gaspar, who has these amazing abilities to identify top talent. And what is exactly Gaspar doing in the interview process? Well, let's just throw the transcripts into ChatGPT and ask it, and then see what it comes up with, and then use Vercel to build a quick deck. It's not this whole oh, I went away and I had a tiger team for 6 months and these are our learnings. In the era of AI, I really think it's just these little experiments. And Viet does a great job of describing that. The second one was create leverage where possible. So his automated back channel example, I can't tell you how many times at every company I've ever worked at where people are like, well, is there anyone inside the company who knows this person? And instead of trying to basically every single time looking through the employee database, which I have certainly done, and I'm sure many people listening to this pod have done, that's the moment where it's I'm doing this thing a ton of times. Where can I use technology to create leverage? And how can I do this without a human in the loop? Again, even if this is going back to the first insight, which is it doesn't have to solve all of the problems, but if it solves even 50% of the problems, or at least makes progress on them, then it's something worth doing.
When people use that phrase in general, progress over perfection, it's often not hey, choose which one is it. Do you want to make progress or do you want perfection? Because if you just have those two options, then obviously, okay, I'll choose perfection then. Really, what you're saying is, in a world where you're not going to do it at all, unless it's perfect, it's better to make progress. So it's essentially, really, the equation is, do you want to do nothing or do you want to do something? And clearly something is better there. And I think that's the world that people get stuck in too much, which is, hey, I don't want to do anything unless it's perfect. And then, a year passes and you've done nothing.
This is honestly one of my favorite episodes we've ever done. And I really think this episode is going to help people stimulate their curiosity. I'm getting off this call. I had 3 other ideas, which I'll talk about in upcoming episodes of stuff that I've been cooking with since this. So I think you guys are going to love this one. And so without further ado, here's my conversation with Viet. This is 10X Recruiting, a podcast from Metaview. Let's get after it. Viet, so I think I've been trying to get you on this podcast now for how long? 2 months? 2.5 months?
Yeah, at the very least 2 months. And also not just getting me on the podcast, but also Amna, my boss, be like, yo, when are you going to respond to Nolan?
I literally texted her and I was like, yo, I need you to tell Viet that if he doesn't come on the podcast, you're going to dock him in his performance review. So I think that's why you're here today. So thank you for coming. The history for people, by the way, is did I try and hire you at DoorDash or was it at Carta?
To be clear, you tried to hire me at Carta and you rejected me. And yet we're still, actually, I went back and looked at all the emails that we've exchanged and it just brought me back. But, it goes to show the connections and conversations you have, they don't always end in sort of this transactional period.
Yeah.
It can if you let it. But like, I'm glad that wasn't the case here.
Yeah. And it turns out like I was an idiot, clearly. And obviously, I don't think we had you for the right role. I do think you are now in your zone of genius. So can you tell people like what you're doing now at Vercel?
Yeah. So at Vercel, I lead all of global recruiting operations. My journey into ops was both an accident, but also intentional. Like I had done the head of talent thing for a better part of like a decade and a half. And I always knew that ops was an area that wasn't like my skill set. It wasn't like the thing that I was really good at. And so I decided I'm going to do a tour of duty and go do ops for 5 years and get really good at it. And then so I can then take that back and go be an even better head of talent at some point. And so in hindsight, that was like the intention, but a lot of it was actually also by accident. At Vercel, I leave all of like global operations. So that's everything from coordination, reporting, programming, and then sort of now this other wheel, which I know we're going to talk about, is I've been just like cooking on a bunch of different things to help make the recruiting team more efficient, which wasn't really intended, but ended up becoming like both part of my job, but also like a hobby that I've been doing on nights and weekends.
Okay, so we're going to spend basically all of our time on this, but like who does an actual tour of duty for 5 years outside of like a fucking Marine? Like normally that's like 5 months. Like how did it turn to 5 years?
I don't know, just curiosity, interest, one opportunity to the next. I mean, I did it at GEM when I was leading our talent advisory team. I had spent all my time talking to like rec ops folks, and I was like, wow, like I'm learning a ton from these conversations. And so I was like, okay, now let me go try to do that in-house. And I decided to go do in-house at one of the biggest and most successful companies in the world, which was also a huge like a learning at Netflix of like, how does like a company like Netflix, how did they do it? And then now how do I scale it back to like bring it back to a company like Vercel that's in hyper growth? So it's been while 5 years, but all similar to TA, depending on where you do it, like you're going to learn something very different. So it doesn't feel like 5 years.
Dude, I know time does fly, especially as you age, is what I'm finding. All right, so I want to clue the audience in on this text that you sent me. So this is from Friday, August 22nd. You said, listen to the pod at the gym earlier tonight. It sparked an idea. I heard this one guy is like an interview savant. The people he gives strong yeses not only get hired, but crush it when they get to Vercel. So you then turn this thing, like give the audience like what's going through your head and where you're taking this stuff.
So serendipitously, we had just come out of a conversation of, I think, performance reviews or something. And the conversation was who on our engineering team is very good at interviewing. And somebody had said this guy, Gaspar. And like, I don't know him super well, but like I've sort of heard his name and enough times to know like, okay, this is like legit. And again, serendipitously or ironically, I was listening to the pod and you guys are talking about like, I forget exactly what it was, but it was about like, how do we use interview data? And so I was like, okay, I know this person's really good. How do I take his brain and his eyes, help everyone else learn how to look at candidates the way he does? And so what I did was I popped into basically searched this person's name, pulled out all his interviews and all the people who were strong yeses, and sort of I'm marrying it with greenhouse data and trying to figure out, okay, who's a strong yes, who's a yes. Of the people who are strong yeses, take that information, port that into ChatGPT of like analyze this information for me and tell me like what behaviors are we seeing from folks who are strong yeses? And then what behaviors are we seeing from people who are yeses? But also on the other side, what people just like outright fail. And interestingly enough, you would think like, okay, I have to look at, it depends on the interview, but it actually doesn't. Behaviors are sort of consistent across interviews, whether it's a coding interview or a values interview. Taking all that, and this is like maybe 3 hours, 4 hours of work on a Friday night and just stemming from pure curiosity. And so I took all information and it was actually relatively easy to sort of tease out the behaviors. And I threw into a deck and I sent to our recruiting leadership team, our engineering leadership team, like you asked like what Gaspar sees in candidates, this is what he sees in candidates. And now we have like 5 very clear behaviors that we look for. And a lot of them are like, I think off the top of my head, it's things like, are they good at problem framing? Do they ask questions before they like jump into solving? Do they think about solving for the short term, but also thinking about the long term? Like how do they think about trade-offs? And so it's things that we know, but to be able to like synthesize that into five very clear points makes it operational. Like we can operationalize that.
So, okay, so let's just take a quick step back. So like this is you on a Friday night, like, you just gone to the gym. Now you're like opening a bottle of wine and you're like, okay, Gaspar is like a dope interviewer, and people who we end up hiring that he gives a strong yes to typically tend to do well in the company. I think the problem statement here is like, is there really some sort of correlation? Like, what is going on? And so then what you do is you take all of the transcripts from every interview he's ever had. I'm assuming you then correlate the score with those transcripts and you just drop it in, like, all of that data into ChatGPT, right? And you're just like, hey, what is Gaspar seeing when he's giving a strong yes versus a no and a strong no? Is that right?
That's exactly right.
That's not that complicated, right? Like that's like, so then you get this output, right? And then I'm assuming then you're like having a conversation with ChatGPT, right? Of just like, oh, like what are the actual behaviors? Like what are the technical skills? And you're trying to see if there's like anything kind of interesting here. Dude, can you show the deck? Like,
Yeah.
you guys should watch this on YouTube on Metaview site, because like when I saw this deck, it was like one of those moments where I saw kind of like the inside of the Matrix again. And I was like, holy shit, like this is the level of creativity that drives insights. All right. So here's the deck. So explain this to people.
I built this in V0, so shout out to the V0 team. Like the best way and the cleanest way to build like great decks. Like I am fully convinced. And yes, I am drinking the Kool-Aid a little bit, but frankly, like try it for yourself and tell me I'm wrong. So I basically all I did was I took all of the insights and I had all of them in a Notion doc. So I took the entire Notion doc, dumped into V0. I was like, hey, build me a deck. And so it literally gives me all this data. So like, what's his like interviewer distribution? Like, what is the end count for each of the interviews? And like, this is so dope. Like 87% of people Gaspar gives strong yeses to ends up with an offer. Like, and for any interview, not just a value, whether it's a values interview or a coding interview, doesn't matter. Like if he gives them a strong yes, they're more than likely getting an offer. And you go into sort of like what I was mentioning earlier. It's like, okay, what are some of the indicators or the behaviors that he looks for? And so these are it, right? So like problem framing, articulating trade-offs, et cetera. And you go into communication. So like it's not just the behaviors, but how do those behaviors like come to life?
Yeah.
Are they thinking out loud? Are they structured in their responses, et cetera? I'm going to pause there because I know you have questions.
So what's interesting about this, right, is you get this output, and then the power for me, like one of the things I've learned in my career is there's always this thing kind of like going on underneath the surface. But until you name it, right, and show it to people, they don't get it, right? It's like, it's kind of just like it's living there and everyone knows there's something going, there's like some magic. But basically what you've done is you've taken the magic and you've pulled together the ingredient list, right? And so you take this you show it to leadership. What do they say? Like, what are they doing with this information?
Well, I mean, we're actually going through a big evolution for interviewer training. And so this is going to be like effectively a foundational brick for how we think about training interviewers. Like these are the things that like we need to be looking at when we're interviewing, and not just interviewer training, but how we look at candidates. Like how do you back into people who have great calibration scores? How do you back into like how does that show up in the interview? And so this is just like one of those foundational bricks that we like so glad that we kind of tripped over, but will end up being like critical to what we do next.
Okay, keep going for the rest of the deck. Show the audience the rest.
Quick references. So again, just a quick summary.
Yep.
And this actually, I realized this is the end of it. So I think probably the two slides I find most valuable is this slide and this slide.
Yep.
Those are the two. And I'm actually glad this deck is only 6 slides because that's exactly how long they should be. Anything more than that is too much.
It's such a great example too of just like, hey, we had this conversation and I heard this thing. And then I just like went, and I've been trying to get the audience to understand, like, this is just following your curiosity. Nobody told you to do this, right? This wasn't anyone else. It's like, oh, like, let's just see what happens and pull the thread on this thing. The other thing I thought, Viet, was like, shouldn't this be part of like your guys' operating principles in some way, shape, or form? Like, shouldn't it ladder all the way up to that stuff?
It's funny you bring that up. One of the exercises we did early in the year is we're trying to up level like the quality bar. So everyone's talking about talent density, but like talent density means something different at every company, on every team. And so we've since coined it, to your point, naming things matters. So we have coined like this program is like exceptionally Vercel. Like, who do we hire that's exceptionally Vercel? And so we went around and talked to each team, both at the leader level as well as ICs, to tease out what behaviors make someone truly exceptional. And not going into it sort of putting two and two together, but I talked to sort of the engineering team, and in seeing what sort of Gaspar sees in interviews, there's a lot of alignment, ironically, not so ironic, but it's getting really clear and crystal about like what makes somebody exceptional is critical to like figuring out like how do you then build an interview process to actually get there.
So the other thing I've been pushing, we talked about it in this last week's pod, but I've been talking to a couple of friends about it recently too. Is like when you said this, it's kind of like those dots, right? When you place dots on the board and like you listen to the pod and it connected this dot for you. And then the next one that I connected was like, okay, who's going to be the first company that actually records the calibration session? Who's going to be the first company that does that? Because when you record the calibration session, then what we're going to be able to do is just ask ChatGPT to be a mirror, right? Taking the entire transcript from that, uploading it into ChatGPT and saying like, what are the commonalities of our best performers? How do they communicate? How do they interact with their employees? What is their impact actually look like? Because impact is very subjective. And then like same for like the people who are not top employees, same for the bottom 5%, and then filtering that information back in. So you can take that idea and run with it.
That's a good point, right? Like one thing that me and Amna have been talking about is we care so much about talent density and making sure that we're continuing to raise the talent bar. It's like once you make a hire, we see like the interviewer score, like we see the interview scores. How do we then validate like what we saw in the interview was we weren't sort of getting false positives from the interview process? And so we have a 9-day check-in, which we need to get better about being consistently doing. But like, how do we then take that data to fold that back into the interview process to like them to know? And an idea I've been kicking around that we haven't quite implemented yet is like, for every hire, we talk about a recruiter needs to make 6 hires a quarter. What if actually we include like another dimension, which is like a buffer or like sort of a variable where it's like if the person you hired got a 4 on the calibration, which is the highest, like you actually get a quarter point buffer on top of like your 6 or you're on top of your hire. And so you're not thinking, you're just now layering in a quality measure and not just quantitative measure on hires.
So I've been like screaming from the rooftops on this recently is because like ultimately what everyone says they want is talent density and quality of hire. Yet the only thing we measure is quantity.
Yeah.
The only thing.
This can be a much longer conversation.
So you guys are going to try and solve this problem, or at least here's the thing. This is where I think people go wrong. And you and we've been talking about this, and this has been part of my gripe of getting you on the pod is like, it doesn't have to be fucking fully baked. Like just take it 10% and run an experiment and see what happens. Like, I think that like the issue with our profession that I currently have is everybody tries to like have perfect. They want to present like as like, this is it. This is the new Bible. This is the new Netflix culture deck, right? Everyone like come pray at the altar of like the new Bible. And it's like, I don't think that that's where we are. Every company's going to do things differently and things aren't going to be set in stone. We're going to be super fluid in the future. That's my take.
That's such a good point because again, we won't, for this very specific thing we're talking about, we have the data. So like it's like really easy to just go like explore, like how do our calibration scores match up to our interview scores? And then it gives us sort of a hypothesis that we can then go test. Everything should be a pilot. And I mean, it's not like Google where everything's in beta forever, but there's probably some middle ground. Like you don't have to ship perfect, but you also don't have to keep things in beta for like a decade.
Yeah, we can kill stuff too. Like, and that's okay. Like it's worthwhile to have turned the stone and figured out what's underneath it. Okay, so the other thing I want to talk about is call it like a back channel thing is the way I'm interpreting it. So can you just like give the audience the voiceover of what this thing is?
I don't even know like where this idea came from, but honestly, it's been something I've personally just been really excited about. So one problem that every company has right now is inbound. Like inbound is basically just, it's sitting there. Oftentimes it goes unchecked. Sorry for all the candidates who are listening to this. Like, to be honest, like we just don't have the staff to go through every single application right now. And so I was thinking, I was like, okay, well, what are like high signal applicants? And I was like, there's many ways to look at it. One of those signals is if somebody applies and they might have worked with somebody else at the company, like at Vercel. And so I was like, how can we systematically like flag people who potentially know somebody else at the company, like that weren't referred? Like there are people who applied. Like I've seen people come through the pipeline that I was like, oh, I know that person, but they didn't reach out to me for referral or
Yeah.
anything. And so if I knew, I probably would have been like, hey, recruiter, this person's awesome. Like get this person to the front line. So I was like, all right, there's got to be a better way to solve for this. And I feel like I asked that question often is like there's got to be a better way. And so what I did was, and we're gonna get like really nerdy for a second, so basically what I'm doing is I set up a greenhouse like webhook event sort of listener, and I'm listening for applications, and once I capture that application, I'm using OpenAI to then parse that application, take the resume, and then take that experience and then try to map it to anyone else who's at the company. So I've also have built out a employee database of where for every single person who works at Vercel, where they've worked and when they worked there. And so we're looking at now this person, Nolan, is applying. He worked with X person at DoorDash around the same time. Let me go ping this employee. It's like, hey, what do you think of Nolan? Thumbs up, thumbs down. And like keep it really light. And also the I don't know, like I don't know this person is actually a good option too, right? Or is an important option to have. And so we treat it as more so a net for positive signal. We don't try to like reject people because they don't know somebody. Obviously that's not the case. But it's just like how do we get the people who are high signal to the top of the list and action on those people first? And so now this is like fully automated. And now when anyone applies, it looks at our entire database, see if they know somebody at the company. We ping them, try to get early signal. Recruiter gets that ping and then goes and like moves that person up. And so now that's just like living.
Wow. Okay. So talk to me about the employee database side. I get the candidate side.
Yep.
What did you do to figure out for each employee where they worked and when they worked there? Like, what is the mechanics underneath that?
So there's two ways to go about it. There's like the brute force manual approach, which we had to do to some degree, where I could literally just source all 600 people of the company and put them into Gem and sort of create that CSV.
Exactly.
Right? That's like one way of doing it. I was like, there's got to be a better way. And so like I'm like way too lazy to do this. So I was like, okay, let me see in the Greenhouse API if I get access to somebody's resume. And I actually do, because I know that from the webhook event or webhook, right? So I was like, I can just look up everyone who has a status of hired, pull all their resume and parse it and put it into this database. And so that got me like, and Vercel existed before Greenhouse, so not all resumes are in there, but that got me like 2/3 of the way there. So about 400 people got loaded into a database with where they worked, when they worked there, and sort of, and then thank God for AI. Like basically, it's like, hey, normalize all these companies, normalize all these dates. So like,
Wow.
and so there's like AI is incredible, dude. Like and when I ask candidates like how are they using AI, and they tell me like, oh, like I used to write emails and so on and so forth, and that's like the baseline answer. And I don't dock people for that, but what I'm really hoping for is like who's the like top 5% of like using AI in like really unique ways. And so anyway, I don't want to I digress, but the other thing I'll call out too is we also had to add in a sort of another gate where if two people worked at Meta at the same time, odds are they don't know each other. And it's like, so look at their resumes to see if you can find information of like what team they worked on. If you
Wow.
can, then match it. Otherwise, disregard the fact that they match, because Fortune 100 like matches sort of oftentimes like don't provide very much signal. And so we're like still continue to, I think, tuning the system to like make sure that the positives are actually positives. So there's still some work to do for sure.
And this is like another example. So when people hear this, kind of like old Nolan chirps in, and old Nolan used to be like, well, what about this thing? Like, well, you have more people starting and you're like, well, we're going to gather them eventually. Like maybe we do it once a quarter or whatever. Like, well, it'll get in there eventually, but this is better than nothing. And then other people might say, well, like, is it fair to give people a fast track? Is it fair for candidates who have known somebody to have a fast track. Is that fair? And what I would submit to those people is like, do you think the best way to manage a bucket is chronological order? Because that's what we have today, and some poor soul, right, who's being paid by the company has to go through and sift through 98% shit, right? To then potentially find somebody that's interesting, maybe, but you probably don't get to them because of just the laws of time, right?
Yeah.
And it's just a slight improvement, right? It's not end product. It's just a slight improvement and sets the new baseline at a higher rate than before. Do you agree with that?
100%. It's like perfect is the enemy of progress.
Perfect is the enemy of good is my favorite. Yeah.
Yeah. And so it's like, dude, just make progress. Like
Yeah.
we just need to make incremental progress every day. And it's better than doing nothing. That's for sure.
Totally. Yeah. Like the status quo is not great. Like we all agree with that. So like why live with it?
Yeah, I'm really excited about this. And actually, funny enough, your point around, well, like we have new people starting. So also a feature we thought about, it's like, okay, well, so from whenever, like now we have like another webhook event of like whenever someone is marked hired, parse that resume, add to the database. And so it sort of continues to generate sort of more people in our employee database. One thing I haven't quite figured out yet is like if people term, do we remove them from the database? But it's actually not necessary because if we try to Slack that person, it'll just like bounce. And so it's like not a big deal. But regardless, there's like, I don't know, there's so many rabbit holes that you can go down. And I think that's probably, to be clear, prior to joining Vercel, I have never thought about any of these things. Like I've never built anything. I've never I could not write a single line of code. And so like in this new world, literally anybody can cook. And so I think you just have to have the imagination, understand sort of like, can you reason through how you might do something? If you can reason through how you might do it, you can do it. Like, it's possible.
That's sick. What else are you thinking about right now? Like, what are the other things that are about to come through the pipeline? What's cooking your dome?
Part of my remit is figuring out how do we reduce the administrative overhead for like recruiting at Vercel. And so one thing that we're cooking right now is how do we make our debrief process better? Because like the old school debrief session is like everyone joins the room, reads scorecards, thumbs up, thumbs down, everyone reads out their scorecards, and it's like we spend 20 minutes of just like regurgitating information. And so our leadership team was like, okay, well, here's a better way. What if we have recruiters summarize like the feedback, call out themes, send out the themes before the debrief, and then the only thing the debrief's for is for hiring managers to ask interviewers questions for clarification. But like that summary portion is like a little expensive, right? It's like it takes time, and also we have a rule that like, not a rule, but like we try to push for like debriefs 24 hours after the interview. But how does a recruiter have time to like sort of do all those things within 24 hours? And so the next thing I'm thinking about is like, how can I pull scorecard data, pipe it in to like whatever AI engine, and just have it as like a link in the debrief, and it's just automatically generated. The recruiter doesn't have to do anything. They have to validate it, make sure it all makes sense, but like it's just there.
Yeah, they're just QA. They're not on the front end. They're just on the back end.
Yep. Or like even, I mean, to sort of take one step further, it's like scorecards come in at different times. And so can we actually generate the summary when the first score comes in? And then when the second one then comes in, we like just update it automatically. And the third and the fourth and so on and so forth. So there are a dozen of sort of administrative things I would love to optimize, but you gotta figure out like how to prioritize it properly.
Yep, that's sick. All right, where can people find you?
Mostly LinkedIn. Like I like live on LinkedIn, unfortunately. Like I have not converted to X yet, but LinkedIn or text, or actually honestly, text message is probably the best.
Yeah. But dope. All right. And then I also want to make sure that you're committing to come back like every 6 to 8 weeks to share what you're working on. Otherwise, I will just ping your boss and have it reflected in your performance review.
Dude, I would love, like, honestly, can we get like a community show and tell, like just going?
That's okay. So, this is what you and I talked about. So like last 2 minutes, audience, stick with us. So Viet and I went deep down this rabbit hole, and like, can we like, this is what this is, right? Community show and tell is a great way to describe it. It's just like, come show what you're working on. Like there are no stupid people here. We're all stupid together. Right. And it's like, my dumb, right, is like a very unique form of dumb. But like sometimes I have like dumb ideas, and then I like present them out into the world, and then someone runs with it. And so that's the goal with this thing, is like, I want to elevate our industry such that we're no longer performative, and instead we're operational. And being operational means you're going to work on stupid shit. I'm going to work on stupid shit. But guess what? Like our stupid shit together is no longer as dumb as it once was just living in our head. Like
right.
when I talk to you, I get smarter. When you talk to me, you probably get dumber, but like that's a rare exception. So like, it's just like, come and show what you're working on. And like, I did have to kind of like grab you by the neck and be like, dude, you're coming and like doing this thing. So like, you know, I hope people take this as a great leadership example of just like, come show the world what's up. And I bet you after this, you're going to get 10 pings on LinkedIn and it's going to generate 5 new ideas for you. And then ideally something that you're going to be cooking on between now and the end of the year.
I genuinely hope so. If anyone out there is cooking on something and just like wants to, you know, you're like blocked or sort of just want to like talk through things, like I'm always down to chat. Like this is like, these are the things I'm working on Friday nights. Like, and it's like, I'm not doing it because it's work. Like I genuinely love this stuff. And so if anyone out there is cooking on stuff, like let's chat.
Appreciate you coming on, man. Thank you.